Good afternoon and welcome to our little summary discussion of week 11 of our reading, March 12th through March 18th. I do want to bring out a fact pointed out to me by one of our listeners. I believe I stated back when we were discussing the Passover in Egypt, I believe I stated that the angel of death passed through the land of Egypt on the night of the Passover. I was clearly mistaken in that, and at least one person pointed that out. It seems fairly clear in all the reliable translations. Sometimes we do say the angel of death, but virtually all of the reliable translations state unequivocally that the Lord himself recognized the blood on the lintels and spared the Israelites, and the Lord himself killed every firstborn in Egypt. So it was the Lord dissatisfied with something the Egyptians had done, and I'm going to argue that it was because of their arrogance. I'm going to use that term again later. So remember, in our last reading, Jericho fell miraculously. And recall that immediately after the fall of Jericho, virtually immediately, the Israelites sent, that is to say Joshua, sent spies to the town of Ai. Now, we often pronounce it Ai, but there is virtually no chance that's a correct pronunciation. I believe the pronunciation should probably be Ai or something like that. And the spies came back asserting that there was no need to send the whole army. This is a penny-ante operation. There's no problem. We can take this without even half the army. Now, I would question, was that an arrogant attitude and perhaps unliked by God? Now, we know that there was another reason that the attack failed. The other reason being that a gentleman by the name of Achan had essentially stolen goods from Jericho for his own use. And after he was stoned to death, the next attack was in fact successful. But I would note to you that Joshua did not communicate with the Lord prior to the first Ai attack, and he did communicate prior to the next Ai attack, and that attack was successful. I know it's quite remarkable that Joshua can get these direct communications from God. That would be handy for all of us. But the reality is that maybe that was a hint of arrogance there that was being reprimanded by failure. I would like to read a brief passage from our editor's words on March 12th. He states the following concerning in this section titled The General Conquest of Canaan. The record further hints that God is using the Israelites as his instrument in punishing the pagan Canaanites for their continual wickedness. And I mention that because of the fact that they were instructed to destroy all the Canaanite cities and the Amorite cities as well. So this continual arrogance and wickedness was to be halted by God's servants. Now, I will say to you that F. LaGard Smith asserts that when the people of Gibeon very clearly tricked Joshua, we'll replay that story just briefly. They loaded up their critters, their beasts of burden, with stale bread, shot wine, and other aged provisions, and they wore ragged clothing. And they came to Joshua saying, we're from a long ways away, and we'd like to make a treaty with you. And now here I note to you that Joshua did not consult God about this group of men. They were from Gibeon. I have here a photograph, supposedly, of Gibeon. That knoll that we see right there is believed to be the ancient city. Took me a while to find this photograph on the internet, of course. It must be real. It's from the internet. The airport, the Jerusalem airport, is right over here. I mean, you can't see it, but that's the location of the Jerusalem airport. So in point of fact, these gentlemen were not from a great long ways away, were they? Now, F. LaGard Smith says that they were sinning and deceiving, which they were deceiving. But I would note to you that maybe, just maybe, they believed, just as Rahab did, that the Lord was in charge, is in charge, and they were acting on that faith. In any event, what happened was Joshua did not consult the Lord. They agreed to a treaty, and in due time, they discovered that these people were from just down the road, which brings us to just down the road. If we look at our map, the Gibeonites, now right there is Jerusalem. Gibeon is not on the map, but it's just off my fingertip on this map. And right now, we are at Jericho, right there. So we've crossed the Jordan River, and we have captured Jericho and Ai, and now the conquest of essentially all of the west of Jordan areas is going to take place. I would note to you that Caleb, again, who knows, that would logically be pronounced Caleb, but anyway, we always pronounce it Caleb, from Kadesh Barnea, went out into this area. Now, note that he was specifically given Hebron, which is right about there. So that's the area that he was promised, and if you've read this whole section, you know that he was given that area. So this, you can see this large area is Judah. So these are, over here is the Jordan River, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea. These are the eastern tribes. So you have to look clear over here at the little key. But this is Gad, Reuben, and this is Manasseh. This is what I would call the half-tribe of eastern Jordan, the Manassites. Over here is also Manasseh. This is the west half of the western tribe. And notice that is to become, after the Assyrian assault, that will become Samaria. And I would note to you on our map, there is Shechem, which is where a burial occurred, I think in this reading, yes. And then and also the reading of the blessings and curses occurred at Shechem. And there is Shiloh. Shiloh is where the Ark of the Covenant will be for the next 100 or more years. Simeon was given part of the area of Judah. This is the part given to Simeon. And there is Beersheba. That is the main town of the Simeonites. And I would quote to you from Joshua 19:9. The inheritance of the Simeonites was taken from the share of Judah because, and now I'm kind of paraphrasing, they did not need it. I don't know what that meant exactly, but nonetheless, that's what it says. So that's where the Simeonites were camped, and that's where they were given property. And I would note to you that they were not on the list. One of our fellow travelers in our reading pointed out to me that they were not on the list of blessings that Moses gave before he died. That's really interesting. I can't explain that. But nonetheless, they were given property, and that's the location of their property, near Beersheba. So after all these victories west of the Jordan, now remember, the very first people to cross the Jordan were, well, of course, the priests walked into the Jordan stopped flowing, and at that point, the warriors from the eastern tribes crossed the river, apparently not their families, just the warriors, and then all the rest of the people crossed. So after the victories in the west were completed, all the peoples of the eastern area, the half-tribe of Manasseh, Gad, the full tribe of Gad, and the full tribe of Reuben, were released from the army and returned to the east side of the river. But once again, the covenant was read at Shechem before Joshua's death. And what's really interesting is that in Joshua 15, there is a reading, which was in our reading this week, that tells the areas that were not captured. And it's interesting because it's somewhat contradictory that the Jebusites, in verse 63 of Joshua 15, it states unequivocally that the Jebusites were still living in Jerusalem and, of course, the Gibeonites with whom they had the treaty. So the area around Jerusalem was not cleared of Canaanites, or in this case, Hittites, when they more or less declared victory in the west. So now we have reached the end of Joshua's dominion over the Israelites. And we have now begun the period of the judges. God would raise up specific judges, different points in physical location, different points in time, and that's what we'll be reading for the next week. Actually, maybe 2 weeks, I can't remember. But I am particularly taken by the reading that deals with Deborah and Jael. One of the early judges was Deborah. And Deborah, Balak, came to Deborah and said, I need you to make sure that I should go attack. I can't remember who he was attacking, but she said, you don't want me to go with you, because if I go with you, this victory will be attributed to women. He said, I don't care. I want you to go with me. So she did, and indeed they were victorious. And here's what's really interesting. So then the king that they vanquished is fleeing, and he takes refuge with Jael, a woman, and she is aware of who he is, and he tells her, if anybody comes, say that that there's nobody else here. She says, fine, fine. He goes to sleep, and directly this woman, now we've had Deborah has effectively run the victory, and now this woman drives a tent peg through the king's temple, and she kills the king. So this was a feminist victory of the first water. So with that, we will move on to week 12, and we thank you for participating. Look forward to more discussions.